I'm trying to hit as robustly as Joe Persky, but I'm not sure that I quite succeeded.
You were close.
Yes, did you notice it's over by his ear now,
Yes.
though? We'll see if that helps.
Yes.
So we'll call the meeting to order. Let the record reflect that all commissioners are present and accounted for. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under the approving the agenda, there's one item to note. There is now under the consent agenda, everybody should have received it in your email, an E16, the resurfacing contract. Are there any other changes, Mr.
No,
Hammes?
that's the only addition.
Okay. I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, there is a motion and a second. Seeing no discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved. All right, we'll move to the consent agenda. Aside from the number E16 that we've added, is there any items that members wish to pull to talk about?
I'll move the consent agenda, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Bertram. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, great. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the items in the consent agenda, including E16, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The consent agenda items are approved. All right, environmental services.
Good morning,
Ms. Benson.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Shelley Benson, Environmental Services Director. We have a public hearing for you and then an informational item for you today, and Angie Berg is here to present those items.
Great, thank you, Ms. Berg.
Good morning, Commissioners. Angie Berg, Environmental Services. Starting on packet page 51 is the first agenda item, and this is to consider enacting Ordinance 667, which would amend Stearns County Land Use and Zoning Ordinance number 439. The board scheduled this public hearing earlier this month, and by a bit of a summary related to this, the board appointed a subcommittee last summer to discuss accessory building standards. And the information was presented at the December 21st Planning Commission meeting, and I'll provide a bit of a summary of what the work group and the Planning Commission discussed. So there was two topics related to accessory buildings. The first was how to handle accessory buildings on lots without a residential building entitlement. And the recommendation from the work group and the township was to inform townships that they can enact a more restrictive standard for accessory structures. B, amend the definition of accessory structure to basically strike the word structure from the definition. And C, provide townships with examples of what constitutes an accessory use. The second issue, or the second topic rather, related to accessory buildings was how to handle accessory buildings on non-riparian parcels. And this is a subject that has come up for the last 2 years a lot of times in our office. And so our due diligence is to bring it forward to the commissioners and to the Planning Commission and say what the public is asking for. What they're asking for basically is to amend the ordinance to allow larger accessory buildings on non-riparian parcels. And so the rationale for allowing more accessory buildings on non-riparian parcels is that the whole reason behind accessory buildings on riparian parcels is limiting the views from the public water. Lots that are riparian are typically smaller. We need to make sure we have room for septic systems. Non-riparian parcels don't have those same concerns. So the idea would be if you're non-riparian, you could have a larger accessory building area. I'm going to show a little map here. So this can get it kind of confusing. So riparian is any lot that touches a water body. and not just any water body, but a water body that is designated by the DNR, and we have to enact our shoreland rules. I used Grand Lake as an example because we don't have jurisdiction there, so we won't be picking on anybody that this would change. But riparian, so as shown here, it's the ones that are touching the lake. Non-riparian would be the ones, if you will, across the road, typically. And then anything shaded in pink on this map is in shoreland. So shoreland is 1,000 feet from a lake, 300 feet of a river. So this would be the first time in our ordinance that we differentiate between riparian and non-riparian. And that is the proposal that really came out of the work group and then the Planning Commission supported. Topic number 3 was mini storage. So should we allow mini storage in the ag districts as a conditional use? Right now, mini storage, and I think we all kind of know what that looks like, is currently only allowed in industrial and commercial. And the work group and the Planning Commission said no. There's too many concerns with that related to traffic, security, outside storage. They were not interested. So we had very little conversation on that topic. So that, I would say, is kind of a moot point, is not part of the changes. So that's really kind of the summary, and I'll draw your attention to packet page F1, and that was the last work group meeting of the accessory building work group that you all put together. I'm not going to go through all of this, but we talked about a lot of things. We talk about, who do we want to get input from? Townships. There was a very township-centric conversation, and so the Township Officers Association met and talked about this several times. My understanding is Shelley talked about it at the November township meeting. I send township lots of emails asking for input, recommendations, attend meeting. So it's very centered on if townships want to be more restrictive, they can. We did a review of some other county ordinances. We summarized the number of permits issued for accessory buildings. For example, in 2022, which is a full year, we issued for residential accessory about 150 permits.
Excuse me, Angie, what page are you on?
Yes, which,
Packet
this is the attachment that is your memo, right?
F1.
Yeah, it's in the attachment on page, it's in the
Yep,
attachment
F1.
on page
So it's
F1, so you
right
click into
after
that.
The link that has the description.
Or do you want me to tell you the PDF page? I'm not sure what's better on your system.
The PDF page is 94.
Madam Chair, I think
Yes.
the packet page is 99.
Well, the one I'm seeing says 94.
Okay.
The online version anyway. So we might have different numbers.
It's the minutes
If
of
you
the
click-
meeting, isn't it?
No,
Right.
right. Oh, you're talking about the minutes or your memo?
The minutes, I think she is.
Well, F1 is her memo.
So
It has lots of things in it, though, Commissioner Bertram. You're right. Please just let us know where within that. The bottom of each of those pages look like they have a number as well. Yes, there are many, like page 4 of 19. Like which page of F1 are you on right now?
8 of 19.
Okay, that helps us. Thank you.
Okay. So that's the summary, and I don't, you all had a chance to look at that. I won't read through it, but there was lots of conversations, lots of different questions asked. We met 2 times for several hours, and that's really all I have to present. We did receive some public testimony, so when you're ready, I can summarize that. And unless you have any questions, the goal for today would be to conduct the public
And Mike Prohl, Board of Adjustment, Amy Sherping, Township Representatives, Diane Knoll, Albany Township, Dan Stomes, Farming Township. So it was a really good mix of people. Appreciate their time. Members, are there any questions before? We'll have a chance to ask Angie or members more questions after we open the public hearing. Okay, seeing none. The public hearing on ordinance, modifications to ordinance number 439 related to accessory buildings is now open. Any members of the public who would like to speak specifically to this ordinance are welcome to do so at this time. Good morning. Please state your name and your address for the record. Welcome, Sandy.
Good morning, Sandy Clocker, Box 284, Avon, Minnesota. I am in the real estate business, many of you know that, and this is a concern many times when we talk to our constituents and the public. Shelley and I have probably talked to each other many times over the years, probably in the last 30 to 35 years. And when I asked my association of 551 members if they knew that this was on the board, they did not. So I am just going to suggest that because we work with the public, because we work with them on land issues, I would love to see that we are informing the public when these issues come up. Some of them did let me know a couple of comments, and I'm going to share with you. These are not all my thoughts. But the land use ordinance is, number 439 is 402 pages. 402 pages of restrictions of what you cannot do with your land. And I hear more and more and more that we are being restrictive of our personal, private property First Amendment right, you know, in our Constitution of what we can and mostly cannot do. So I live in Collegeville Township, and coincidentally, that's the township that, you know, some of this information came about. I feel that I hear from you, we need to stay in the lane. If Collegeville wants to do something, I think you should stay in the lane. We have the riparian and the non-riparian and the 1,000 feet from the water shore. What's the difference from a 95 to 1,005 feet? I think we're getting into discrimination issues. I think people should be able to do what they want on their land. We want to protect the waters, and I think the more I see the EPA or the Environmental Protection, I guess as the EPA or the Environmental Stearns Department come in, I see the water quality coming up with milfoil, zebra mussels. Now we have the avian flu with the swans. I've lived on the water for 45 years. This is the first year we have not had a loon nesting. Something is going on, and I don't think it's the problem of the people. I see a bit of a discrimination when we allow our accessory buildings not to have bathrooms in. I hear from you, Joe, that we want, you know, we want to take care of mother, right? We want to take care of these people. That's what our Social Security is for, the majority, I've heard you say. However, I can't put mom in my outbuilding. That to me is discriminative, and you are hurting our community. We give the farmers the right to bring, you know, citizens or non-citizens in, and in a fourplex on their property. Now maybe they have more land. If you're on the water, you're more restrictive. You pay higher taxes, but you're more restrictive. This is getting into kind of a control thing. The rentals, we started out with rentals, which to me seem to be more of a control thing. And now I understand we've got situations where we have to police the dog poop. You know, let's let people do what they want on their property. I also hear Mr. Notch say, you know, people should be able to do what you want. But we have 402 pages of restrictions. Let's not be hypocrites here. Stay in your lane. I hear a couple of you say continually, stay in your lane. I think people should be able to do what is in the boundary of their properties, and I see this country losing control, and I see us losing control right here. So Karl Marx, in his 1948 Communist Manifesto, did say the theory of communism may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. Carl Schwab, who's at Davos this week, I hope you know what that means, because that's the agenda that you are following. That's the Great Reset. He states, you'll own nothing and be happy. I hope you can start thinking about the private property, the people's rights, because the people are who you represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak to this specific ordinance? Thank you. Please state your name, address for the record.
My name is Peter Wilson. I live at 1108 Celebration Drive, Sartell, Minnesota. I'm not sure on a few
Welcome,
of these
Peter.
things. I'm a little bit vague on some of the things that are being changed. I believe in less control rather than more. I have been in places in my life where controls are very limited, some of the small towns, and you see a lot of unusual building things. But I'm a little confused on the mini storage deal. I've been around much of Minnesota. I was a corporate employee of John Deere Company and did quite a lot of traveling in central, northeast Minnesota, northwest Minnesota, all of North Dakota. And when I've seen mini storage places in the middle of nowhere, and I know there's some issues with proximity to water, but I don't really see where they need to be worried about in any way. To me, it's control, just like the desire to have cameras in these little houses that are rented out. I thought that was either bizarre or perverse, but and this is control. I think we need to look back at the history of land use and control and planning, and again going back to the 1940s, especially early 60s, and the intention of that. And all one has to do is look at the rental thing that goes on here, and it's the international intent of it, and the intent to control land and people. And I have extreme concerns on any of this. Again, the mini storage thing seems odd. The thing with the housing, the no bathrooms, again, having been many places in my life, that just seems a bit strange to me. Again, we deal with the dog whistle of pro-regressivism, this workforce housing, this globalist agenda to change our culture and our nation and how it fits in. I don't have a problem with somebody having their family members in an on-site residence. My mother died of Alzheimer's, a very intelligent woman. There comes a point when you really can't care for her, and at times, not always. But I mean, I think it would be better to have them in close proximity rather than at some distant site. And many people, especially with close family members in an area, have that ability to care, and you're controlling this, I don't think is positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Is there anyone else wishing to comment? Is there anyone else wishing to comment? Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, Angie, would you mind putting into the record the comments that you were given, and then we'll close the public hearing?
Yes, Madam Chair. I received, in your packet, you received two comments, one from a Scott and Bobby Bertram. They live in Collegeville Township. They have 8.4 acres, non-riparian, and they would like to store all their personal items indoor at their property. Therefore, they support the change. We also received an email from a Tom Notch, Sauk Center Township. He's in favor of allowing larger accessory structures on non-riparian parcels, as they need somewhere to store their camper and trailer indoors, and they do not want cluttered property. I also received an email over the weekend from Rhonda Green. She supports giving control to townships. They are better in tune with their constituents, and they should be respected to make these decisions. Lastly, I received more or less questions from Doug Frederickson at St. Joe Township. He asked questions related to accessory structures outside of shoreland, which isn't part of this proposed change. I explained that to him and offered to attend one of their meetings to, discuss what concerns that they might have. So with that, Madam Chair, that would conclude the public testimony.
Okay. I'm going to close the public hearing, and now we'll turn to questions. And did you want to address any of the things that were brought? I made a note about housing without bathrooms. Would you mind addressing?
Yes, Madam Chair, Shelley mentioned that too. As far as accessory dwelling units, if you remember a few years back, we did amend our zoning ordinance to allow accessory dwelling units. That is not what we're talking about today. We're talking about accessory structures for storage purposes, not for living purposes. So just a point of
Thank you for that
clarification.
clarification to the public. I know that we all knew that, but that's important for people. to know. And for the public, if you're watching and you're wanting to look, this is all online and you can see where the recommended changes are. Commissioner Notch or Commissioner Persky, since you served on, is there anything that you want to make sure we know? And then I'm quite sure that we're going to have some other questions or comments.
Yeah, Joe and I both attended both meetings, and I guess my takeaway was the townships pretty much said, well, it doesn't seem like it's a big issue, but they would like to have the ability to make that decision on their own. And I think staff is pushing this out to March, so if any townships want to be more restrictive, they can be. Overall, it didn't seem like anyone outside of Joe and I had any concerns with not allowing this change to occur, especially in the non-riparian, because it seems like that was more of a concern than the riparian on the water, you know, where you block people's views, you know, by adding additional footage to, you know, external structures. You know, and I know there was some discussion on bathrooms, septics, water supply, but overall, I guess my takeaway was, you know, the township said, well, you know, let us decide, you know, if we want to be more restrictive. So I think that's kind of my takeaway. Everybody seemed to concur, you know, even the planning commission members, so.
Thank you. Commissioner Persky?
Yes. I was, you know, sitting in on those meetings, and also I have a number of concerns, but it goes back to, I guess, what I'm concerned about is the potential of these being used not as sheds, not as accessory buildings, but actually the potential for them to be used like cabins, and that we would be perpetuating a situation where we would maybe be developing clusters of sheds, and instead of them being sheds, they would actually be cabins. And that's the concern that I have. As far as a person being able to put a shed on their property, I think the definition of an accessory building says that it should be an accessory to the property. So if it's an ag, Angie, see if I'm correct, if it's zoned ag, that the accessory building should be accessory to agriculture, is that correct?
Ms. Berg?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Persky, I'm glad that you mentioned that. So there's one place in the zoning ordinance where taxation equals what's allowed for zoning, and it's it's for agricultural accessory structures. So if a property is taxed agricultural, the accessory buildings fall under ag accessory, and they do not have any of these same restrictions that we're talking about today. So ag accessory is not part of what's being proposed, just residential accessory.
Thank you for clarifying that. Commissioner Notch?
Well, I was just gonna, you know, tagging along what Joe mentioned, we had that discussion, but there's also a civil process if people are found to be living in these
And that
facilities.
actually was something I was hoping you'd address, Ms. Berg. I mean, I hear your concern, Commissioner Persky, and that could be a concern right now too. So what steps are being taken, because clearly this will not allow for that. So how do we prevent the concern that Commissioner Persky has from occurring?
Madam Chair, we did discuss that at the work groups. Commissioner Persky and I have talked about that a lot. We have a process, we have a written process for complaints and violations, and under two situations do we look at a violation. One is if a property owner is applying for a permit, we make sure that they're in compliance with what's going on their property. Number two is if it comes as a complaint. Written complaint to our department, it's anonymous, and then we follow up. So if I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I believe we had 2 complaints on this, 2 violations on this issue, meaning someone using a residential accessory structure for living purposes. We had 2 in the last 5 years, neither of which are a problem anymore. We do have a process for violations. I think right now, if I looked at my screen, we'd probably have maybe 150 going on throughout the county at any given time, and we don't sweep them under the rug. We work through them. We give people time and options, as all of you know. And so I would just like to state that we do investigate, and we do require compliance.
As a follow-up, Commissioner Notch and then Commissioner Bertram is
Oh,
waiting patiently.
And I was just going to say, there is no residential building credit either on these properties, correct? For the most part, that was discussed too. If there's no residential building credit, they really can't use it as a living quarters.
Ms. Berg?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Knotts, right, that's correct. The other thing that we did talk about at the committee is, as you know, in Stearns County, we have, let's just say, for example, A40, you have 40 acres, you want to sell 5 for a building site, you can restrict 35. And the only thing that can't be on that 35 acres out of the list of 200 uses we have is a residential dwelling unit. All the other things are allowed on that land that's restricted. So in cases where someone has built an accessory structure on a parcel without a residential building entitlement, one of their options would not be to convert it to a home or to remain. They would have to eliminate the use of that residential dwelling.
Thank you. Commissioner Bertram?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a public hearing. We're going to act on it. I support trying something, but what I'm trying to do, I'm going to have just general comments, some specific questions, but just general overall. I've interacted with this because of being on the Planning Commission, and Commissioner Persky was the board member to the Planning Commission as this has evolved in the last 6 to 9 months on these sheds. So I'm certainly all in favor of allowing accessory buildings, but we need to be concerned about where we're doing that and what the intent is. The history of this goes back, I don't know what, I can't remember exactly. I remember the property owner, all what they wanted to do was store boats and things in a old machine shed. They weren't farming anymore, and the county didn't allow them to do that at the time. And he wanted to build storage sheds, and this is a very remote rural site, and he wasn't able to do that either. Well, that, in my opinion, at the time, wasn't right. I mean, utilize the machine shed, and let's face it, we all know there's a lot of machine sheds, even when it wasn't allowed, that were being used for storage. I guess somebody could say illegally, but again, common sense, why wouldn't you allow that? So we're kind of, but historically, that's kind of where we've come from. When we were trained to be planning commission members, it was pounded into us, be proactive. Don't do something knowing that something else is going to happen negatively. You know, our job with the comprehensive plan and all of the ordinances and everything else are to prevent issues. And the property rights, I'm a strong property rights person, and I always have told people my property rights end at the property line where yours start. So I think I can, have a loud party until 2 o'clock in the morning, and if I don't care about you, I'm going to do what I want to do. Well, that doesn't always work, unfortunately, and so that's why we have to kind of be the parent here of trying to, and 99% of the people are not going to try to misuse this, but I'll guarantee you it's going to get misused. Every time we've had an ordinance, and I'm kind of, after a year, I'm kind of getting sick of people coming up and saying, well, it's an ordinance. The staff says it's an ordinance, and I say, well, and who brought the ordinance to the board? I mean, it's staffs of all of our departments bring ordinances to the board approves them, and then after a while they say, well, it's an ordinance that's causing this issue. Well, that's why we want to be proactive. I met with a guy about 6 months ago, and by the way, Angie has done an outstanding job in managing this, including because of the snowstorm on Saturday, Sunday, Monday when she's not working. We were in conversation and she offered that, so I took advantage of that, unfortunately for her. But that's when I had time to look at it, and I went through everything as we all did, but in great detail. But there was the guy in Main Prairie Township had literally cut off 5 feet of a small storage shed so that he could build his accessory building. And I mean, I couldn't believe it. I went there to meet him on site because I shouldn't say I didn't believe him, but I couldn't believe it. And yep, there it was. There's a shed that was 5 feet cut off just so he could build his accessory. So again, let's get beyond that. And by the way, he was in the shoreline because it was an environmental lake, which was across the road. Nobody lived on it, whatever. The water quality to me is less of an issue than it is just neighbor, what are people gonna try to do with this? There's townships. I'm really gonna encourage townships to really, really look at this, to be proactive. My only concern with that is we didn't see the number of solar, and when I say we, the county, I wasn't on the board, I was on the planning commission. I don't think any of us saw the potential for the influx of how solar hit the county. And with a blink of an eye, we've got 50 solar sites. And so oftentimes that's, in my opinion, not us not doing a good job of being proactive. The wind situation, at one point we had 5 applications, only 1 came to be, but we went through a lot of work in that, in going through that. Vacation home rentals, nobody saw that coming. And just like that overnight, it was a major issue. And townships, had to react to it and enforce moratoriums and all that other stuff. And the county, I mean, it just hit hard. And again, nobody saw it coming. We didn't see it coming on planning, and the board didn't see it coming. So that's my concern. Anything that I say is, did we think this all through, and what are we gonna do when something happens? Because what will happen? What's the worst thing that can happen? Getting back to some of the comments about property rights and everything else. What can happen is, somebody's gonna look, and whenever we did something, I always said, state, federal, when the Farm Bill was passed, I always said, what you should do is get 10 farmers together, throw it on the table and say, how can you get around that? And that's what we should do with this ordinance, is throw it on the table with, and again, unfortunately, that's only 1% of the people. But once you start building 15 accessory sheds, and I call them, I'm sorry, I still call our garage at the house a shed, and it irritates Marlene, but it's a shed. Coming from the farm, it's a shed. So once you allow sheds close to the lake, because you can't build a lake home, and then make it a house without following the procedure, I'll guarantee you're gonna have problems. You're gonna create environmental problems. You're gonna create problems with the neighbors. Is storage allowed around them? If plumbing, if you have a building right for a house, the likelihood that you're gonna try to make an accessory a shed, a house is less likely, because you got a house. But where you're gonna wanna push, you push it in, it's like the doughboy, you push it in one area and it's gonna pop out in another one. Where it's gonna be is where you can't build a house, you're close to the lake, and so you're gonna make the shed a house. Did you do those pictures, or can you call, of course, as a boring life that we lead on Saturday morning when we were driving through a snowstorm on the way to the Spicer, I saw these 2 sheds, just coincidentally. I'd seen over the couple of months being built. Now, I don't know, the one on the left is right on Diamond Lake, clearly within shoreline. And I don't know what Kaneohe County allows or doesn't allow. The one on the right is in the middle of the country. I don't know what those are. And I asked Angie, I turned around in the bad weather and I had Marlene take those pictures, because I thought, well, right there you see 2 great examples of what is that? And I don't know what that is. And that kind of concerns me, because again, yep, property rights, you have a right to property rights, but if either one of those 2 are a house and it affects the neighbors, then we should know that it's gonna be a house or a house. If it's an accessory building shed, well, then that's fine, but neither one of those 2 look to me like a shed. And again, I don't know what the intent is, but I just wanted to share that, because again, that's my concern. Townships, I have the utmost faith in townships. However, one thing I did find out, especially with the solar issue, is townships have said, well, yes, we would like to be more restrictive, or we'd like to add some things, or even with the vacation home, but they said, who's gonna enforce it? If you're a small township, you can enact stricter ordinance, but then they have to enforce it. Well, when we're doing the enforcement, it's easier for a township to work with us to enforce it. But if you make it more restrictive, now they have to enforce it, and they really don't have any way of enforcing it. And so they're gonna have the ability to do it, but it's not clear how they're gonna be able to enforce it. And again, I'm not concerned about townships making their decision. I'm concerned about empowering them that they can then enforce whatever that is. And of course, the example I said before about if you have a house, you're less likely to try to make the shed into a house. And the other thing is a transfer of development rights. So if you can't build, the reason we did that is so you can't build a house, you're selling that right to a neighbor, and so now that means you can't build a house on that land. Well, now suddenly you're gonna have accessory shed and make that a house. That's where, again, that's me being proactive of saying, that's not what this intent is. And again, 99% of the people just want to build a shed, want to store their stuff, and we should allow that. But let's be proactive. How do we address those other issues? And maybe we need to enact this and then let the chips fall and then react to it as things happen and then come up with a better way. But that's a little bit of general stuff, and I might have a little bit more.
Commissioner Bertram, you brought up several examples where property rights, it's that balance, right? Several of the items you've brought up, the property owner may want to do things and some other people may not want them to. And so that's, let's face it, as you all know, that's how we get in the middle of some of this, is somebody has done something that people don't like, and then they come and then we try to figure it out. Commissioner Lensmeyer, you might have something else you want to add, because one of the things I was thinking about this, you've been really helpful to me in terms of thinking about, we're trying to make things better, and it's never going to be perfect. And so it means likely the need to keep revisiting over time, both being proactive, but then also what different people living in different places or the times might change what we're thinking. I don't know if you have anything else, anything you want to add to this particular proposal.
This is evolutionary. Yeah, as time goes on, we are sincerely attempting to make things better, but you know, our crystal balls are only 110 volts when we need the 220. Long story short, the regulations that we come up with for townships consistently forget that townships are limited in their arms and legs to do enforcement type activities. And so we have these whiz-bang ideas that either we come up with or staff comes up with, and you put this stuff out in the field and it hits the fan. So we do the best we can with what we got to work with, but we consistently make it more complicated without considering the long term how we're going to do this. So this is, if you sat here somehow, I won't be here 20 years from now, some of the same things will still be coming up. And when you put more regulations in, it's pretty hard to do that without infringing on what someone else feels is their freedom. So I appreciate the intentions of our effort, but good intentions don't always produce good results. We'll just keep on working our way through this, but townships are really, really limited in their ability to do enforcement. And whenever we come up with these whiz-bang ideas, realize that somebody's got to go out there where, you know, the rubber meets the road, and they don't have that ability. So you know, that's the only, this was interesting to listen to, but we consistently in our in our efforts to make things better, we don't always get the outcomes we're after. I don't have anything else to add. This is reality.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
I do.
Okay, then it looks like Commissioner Nutt.
Yep, Angie, I just want to address a couple things. Again, back to the concerns that Ms. Clocker had. So as far as an accessory structure, let's say a small dwelling with amenities, we allow that on a residential lot now, do we not? For example, for someone to have a relatively, you can have an accessory structure with toilet, shower on a residential lot, correct?
Ms. Berg?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Persky, yes, that accessory dwelling units are allowed. There are some limitations on size.
Yep.
And in Shoreland, the lot has to be big enough. So, but
Correct.
yes, the board did that several years ago. I think we've
Yep.
issued maybe 4 to 6.
Yeah, okay,
Or
so
so?
that's possible.
Correct.
But what I'm concerned about is the other side of the road from the lake homes. So now, under this scenario, would you be able then to allow that 40-acre parcel that's behind that, or linearly along that lake road, cut it into half-acre parcels, quarter-acre parcels, and then put accessory buildings on those parcels? And on those parcels, could those accessory buildings then all have a kitchen, shower, bath, furnace, wood stove, okay, and still be considered an accessory building?
Ms. Berg?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Persky, the answer is yes, they could build them. No, they could not have the amenities and use it as a residential dwelling unit.
Okay, they could build
Can you
them,
extrapolate on
Yeah.
that, just for the public?
So the ordinance would allow them to build the accessory structure, but there's a definition in our ordinance that talks about what constitutes a residential dwelling unit. And so it all comes down to use. So we're skirting on building code, which is a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. But without building code, Stearns County is very limited on what we can't get into buildings, right? So we don't look at framing, we don't look at plumbing, we don't look at any of those things. So we don't know how they're always finished out. The 99% of the people, as Commissioner Bertram stated, are gonna follow the rules. There's gonna be a percent that doesn't. That's why we have a couple hundred open violations right now on all sorts of things, right? So the answer is someone calls and they ask if they can do it, and the answer is here's what you can have. You can have an accessory structure. You cannot have a residential dwelling unit. Now, what they do after they build it, herein lies why we have a civil process to handle zoning violations. So it's sort of like the analogy, Commissioner Persky, that I've used a couple times, and you can take it or leave it, but just because I might speed on the way home doesn't mean I don't get a car, right? So you could think about it that way too. Now, you could not allow accessory structures anywhere unless they have a house. I can tell you one last thing and then I'll be quiet. I attended our planning and zoning administrators, a local county planning and zoning administrators meeting last week. And almost every single county in our district, which is about 10, is dealing with a very same thing with this, with rentals, with RVs, which we've already dealt with. So we're not alone. No one has the perfect answer. It's why we do what we do. It's why we have a zoning office, and it does constitute enforcement sometimes.
Commissioner Dodge?
Yeah, well, again, to me, we will have, in my opinion, if we have 99% that are going to follow this, so we're going to stymie this for the chance that the 1% somebody's going to do a violation. I really think, being preventive, I think by what we did through the work group, and I'm assuming the Planning Commission approved it as well, was vet some of these ideas to make sure that we have a good product. And in regards to Commissioner Lensmeyer with the townships, we can say the townships maybe don't have the enforcement capabilities, but I think a lot of the townships that have a lot going on have their own planning and zoning. And they already, we know what the vacation home rentals, they put their restrictions on, or they say they're not allowed. So I think the townships are more astute than sometimes I think we give them credit for. And I really truly believe that townships that want to really keep a thumb on what's going on will do something to make it fit their needs. I think, some townships are pretty wide open. They'll just accept whatever the county's got for their ordinances, regulations, and deal with it from there or on a case-by-case basis. So, I'm, in my opinion, giving this a shot the way we have it set up, because I think the biggest issue for me with people who've contacted me is they have a small acreage parcel in non-riparian, so they're not on the water, but they can't even put their camper or build a shed to put their camper in, because right now it's limited by the size that we have. By the non-riparian removing that, now someone can get their camper inside versus parked along the house or by the trees. Or I think, to me, what the work we stuck into this is worth adopting these changes and seeing where it goes.
Commissioner Persky.
Yeah. Again, the use of the accessory buildings, like you're saying, storage, ag use, that's not a problem. Again, you're hearing me say, I'm concerned about the proliferation of cabins. What would be wrong with allowing these, the ordinance to go as is, and then just make a request for a CUP if you're going to put in plumbing?
Ms. Berg?
That's kind of micromanaging. I think.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Persky, I did look on Friday, my staff and I spent quite a bit of time looking at the numbers of accessory structures with holding tanks, so with plumbing, in the last 6 years, and I think there were 75, and 30 of those were within shoreland. I would say, and Shelley can chime in if she wants, obviously it's a staffing issue, that's a lot of additional work, cost, and I guess I would just ask the board to consider does that outweigh the need for the getting at the 1%? Because you could still have a conditional use permit. It becomes more about the person, which it shouldn't, and you could still have them do the same exact thing, and then we're back to enforcement. That's the way I see it.
Right. And if you think about it, I mean, what we're trying to do is enact ordinances that are really for the vast majority, which is usually more like 90%, not 99, who are trying to do the right thing so that they have information about what to do, give townships flexibility, and then enforce the ones that go the other way. I mean, part of where we ran into the vacation home rentals is so many people were doing things kind of under the radar, and that was a real problem. So if at times, if we're giving people parameters, they're more likely to actually do something that's closer to the right thing. Certainly, Joe, the things that you bring up, Commissioner Persky, are things that we need to keep an eye on. And right now, there'd be an issue if they did that. I would hope we wouldn't need to go to a CUP for every single person who's looking at doing something. Commissioner Notch.
I guess I would make the motion to consider and to enact ordinance 667 with the changes.
There's a motion to enact ordinance 667. Is there a second?
I can second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Lensmeyer. There's a motion and a second. Any further conversation, recognizing we may be getting to the end of it? Commissioner Bertram.
Madam Chair, I'm always amazed. I swear I want to play the tape back while we're sitting here on things that were said and then somehow taken a whole different direction. I made it very clear from the beginning, I support the ordinance. I support empowering townships. I totally disagree with that. We should just let it hit the fan. I mean, that's kind of what we've been doing the last how many years. We just let it happen. And then we say, oh my God, I didn't know that. Well, yeah, you did. And if you didn't know it, you were supposed to know it. And then now we're trying to fix it. So townships, I totally, and that's why I support moratoriums and solar. So yeah, I guess I certainly have shown that I support townships 110%, but I feel sorry for them because they've told me we have a problem in trying to enforce this. We don't have staff. We don't have, there's a lot of small townships out there that have the right intention, but can't do it. And the 1% in those small townships will cause problems. So again, very clearly, that's what I said at the beginning, and that's what I'm saying now. So I'm not sure how that could go in a different direction. But when I would remember about 1975, I was 15, and someone from a metro area bought a lot right beside our farm, and we had heard about it, and we stopped, of course, the way we did it The way mom did it, and the way we do it now is welcome the neighbor and everything. And when we drove out of the little, he was gonna build a house in the shed. And when we drove out of the yard, they seemed real nice and everything. And Dad said, you know what? Someone like that could cause the neighborhood a lot of problems. And he did. Suddenly, manure was a problem, the smell of manure, combining corn, one thing after another, and the guy did cause a lot of problems. So again, it's just kind of being realistic, and that's what we're being in denial if we don't understand that. And again, I support, let's try this. We are gonna have to have changes. And when something happens, if somebody says, well, I didn't know that, I'm gonna be very happy to say, yes, you did, and we'll go back to the record of what we talked about. You said legally they couldn't do that, and of course, that's part of the problem is we don't always know that. And if they do it and it's not legal, they don't cause a problem, we'll never hear about it. But again, it's the person that's gonna have the party until 2 o'clock in the morning or store a bunch of junk around the shed, and then we're gonna look and say, we can't do anything about that. Now that's a problem, unfortunately, for that area, for the neighbor or whatever. By the numbers, again, by the numbers of what you issued, that was yesterday. You know, somebody smarter than me, and I can't remember who it is, maybe Commissioner Clark will know, said the future starts today. The future isn't tomorrow. The future starts, so the minute we do this, the future started on this, and we're gonna see how that falls through. The taxation, I talked to Jake Pittle, the assessor, and him and I are gonna have a conversation, and I shared this with Angie and our back and forth on the questions. I'm a little confused on that the taxation goes by what the use is, even if it's not allowed. And so if it's a commercial lot, agriculture lot, you're not supposed to have a residential unit on it. He taxes, or we tax the residential unit. Well, that kind of seems backwards to me, because if you don't allow a house on the land by taxing it as a house when there's a house there, aren't you kind of allowing that? You know, so anyway, we're gonna have a conversation on that. I just wanna understand that better. Sherburne County does not allow plumbing, so not allowing plumbing isn't a foreign idea. I'm not suggesting that, but they do that for a reason. I talked to several of those commissioners, and a couple of them are new. They asked, they weren't there when it happened. So, and then of course, the two questions I do have is sheds. So the smaller sheds, the one that I told, suggested in Main Prairie, Angie, you know who it is, that 5 feet. So if we allow the accessory structure, the smaller sheds, will they be more apt to be allowed? I know I get the impervious part of that, but will they be more apt to be allowed? So if you got a small 10 by 16 shed with a bit larger, is that gonna be more allowable, more flexible?
Ms. Berg.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bertram, yes, everything that's being proposed today in general is considered to be less restrictive. So the situation you explained, he would not have had to cut part of his shed off to get his shed below 150 square feet, because 150 square feet or lower doesn't count in the total area. So that's why he had to do that under the rules in order to build another bigger shed. So yes, that would be not required anymore.
Which, Madam Chair, makes all the sense in the world. And then the last question is the building code for houses and the building code for accessory building sheds. Is there a difference?
Ms. Berg.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bertram, so without having the complete knowledge of building code, since we don't enforce it here at Stearns County, my understanding from talking to people in townships that do have building codes, such as St. Joseph Township, Linden Township, and even talking to Benton County the other day at our meeting, is, for one, house is really a term of art. It's an architectural style, right? It looks like a shed and it acts like a house. That's really what it is. It's an architectural style. So back to the original question, if someone wants to build what we just showed earlier that you saw on Saturday in Candy, Ohio County, and they want it to be the residential dwelling unit, Candy, Ohio County has building code, they would be required to meet a different standard to build it. So I think the trusses have to be engineered or inspected differently. Fire code or firewall, thank you, Shelley. She had experience with building code. Firewall protection has to be different. So yes, the answer is they have to be constructed differently, But if it's just an accessory structure, then they wouldn't have to meet those additional building code restrictions.
And the
Yeah,
last
as a
one,
dwelling.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner
to
Bertram.
that point, is, I know we don't enforce it, and yet we, what do you call it? We don't enforce it, but we make the party meet it. I never understood that, but
What do you mean?
the building code. We don't enforce the code, and yet, I'm not saying this negatively, I just want to understand it. So we don't enforce the code, but we make the property owner comply with the code, or explain that.
Ms. Benson.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bertram, building code is enforced, building code exists across the state of Minnesota. We don't do enforcement in our office. Various jurisdictions will do enforcement. So someone comes to get a permit for a residential dwelling, their builder is supposed to build to code, period. We just don't go out and check the footings and the framing and all the other pieces of inspection. If, in fact, the only thing that we do is require accessibility code standards, and we are by law required to do accessibility code for things that are commercial, and we have, that has certain value to them for that purpose. So often when we'll have a conditional use permit for a certain type of business, we let that landowner know, once you get your permit, you'll also have to meet accessibility code. So accessibility code is a component of building code. We do not enforce the building code, which means we're not doing inspection for footing and framing and all the other things that they do. If you want to have that conversation, it is a much larger conversation, but we do have townships that enforce for building code.
Commissioner Bertram.
And Madam Chair, I would not suggest that we do that, but that's the part that it gets a little confusing, is that we don't enforce it, but yet we require that it gets met. So, and I'm not saying that negatively. And the reason I ask the question is, again, talk about things that can happen. So we don't enforce a stricter building code for a house. We allow a shed to be lived in, and the rafters aren't like what they should be or whatever, and there's a collapse of heavy snow or something, and somebody's gonna come back and say, you didn't, these are all kind of my concerns if it's used inappropriately. And again, I'm just stating that for the record. I'm not saying we shouldn't do this because of that.
Right.
But those are the number of things that I'm gonna tell you that we're gonna be dealing with.
Well, and Commissioner Bertram, I share those concerns. I don't think that we're, I'm looking around our table, I think we all share those concerns, and this clearly is a work in progress, so that will alleviate some of the restrictions right now for some people. We're going to need to keep an eye on it, and we're going to need to revisit at some point in time. And I think I've agreed with every single thing you've said. So, I for the record.
Wow.
Well, I often do. So members, given it seems like our conversation has run its course, we have a motion and a second. Going to take the vote, if that's okay. All in favor of approving ordinance 667, amending ordinance 439 related to accessory buildings, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye. And Joe, I think Commissioner Persky, I think you're reflecting some of the discomfort we feel with this, so appreciate
I
that.
would think so. I'm just concerned about those people that have what they have already, and also public safety.
Sure. Well, we'll keep an eye towards that. I know that we all are concerned of those things, and I was even thinking, Commissioner Bertram, I really appreciated those pictures. I was also thinking just how differently perhaps we look at things than most of the public does, because we're really into this. I can't go on a lake anymore and not contrast of what I see happening versus where our ordinances are, and that's both a good and maybe sometimes a little scary thing. But I think that's our due diligence, right? So we have one more item, F2. We're receiving some brief information related to towers.
Madam Chair, it was a request of the board for us to take a look at towers, I want to say last summer, and Angie has done a lot of work. Chad May, also from the attorney's office, has done some work. I believe we can summarize that information from Chad. I think the wrong document got attached, but we will make sure you have the correct one eventually. But Angie has a summary of all that information.
And is there a slide for the public or no?
I will be putting that
And
up
very much appreciate the
right
work
now.
you've put into this.
There we go.
Thank you.
You bet.
Ms. Berg.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, so as Shelley indicated, in July, the board had asked for some information on towers. And I know you said brief, so at some point you're just gonna have to ask me to move along. In order to get some kind of way of background, so what's a tower? I mean, we see these things up, but what are the different types of towers that we see? So we see telecommunication towers, which include cell phone towers, TV, AM, FM. We see wind towers, and we see meteorological towers. The last two are mostly related, the meteorological towers are typically related to the wind. So those are the tall structures that you're going to be seeing throughout the county. What do we regulate? We do regulate permits for equipment at the base. So if you think of a cell phone tower or any tower, there's usually equipment. So the equipment's either on the tower, at the base of the tower, or somewhere along the tower. We also do, and we're required to, by the federal government, is regulate addition or replacement of antennas on the structure, on the cell phone tower, for example. What is not regulated by us, obviously permits issued by the township, permits that are for wind towers or met towers for wind farms greater than 50 megawatts. So that's the large wind farm out in Sauk Center, south of Sauk Center. Those towers and the mets related to those are not permitted by Stearns County. And then we obviously don't regulate towers in municipalities. So by way of background, how are they regulated by the ordinance? So pre-ordinance is anything prior to pre-countywide zoning is anything before 2000. They can be replaced at the same height, the same location. In some cases, they have to have a fall easement if where they're building it wouldn't meet the requirements. And then post-zoning ordinance, so anything that we permitted since 2000 is either handled as permitted, conditional, or interim, and it's based on the type of the tower, the height of the tower, and the zoning district. I did list a couple, or list number 5 townships that do permit their own antennas. They're listed here. Obviously, there's a role of the FCC, and I won't read all of this, but in summary, really what they regulate is any tower 200 feet or greater. So that's where they come in. How many and where are they? I'm going to show you a map that the Property Services Department helped put together, and this took longer than we expected because getting data from the FCC isn't super easy, if you can imagine that. But what we have, for example, just to summarize, so the FCC registered towers in Stearns County, so really anything over 200 feet is 96, and we've permitted 23 of them. We meaning the county, so the county or the township. So there's 70 some that are pre-2000. And then I just have a breakdown of what they are. Most of them are cell phone towers, and obviously we have some wind towers, et cetera. So let me just pull up a map. And this is a URL I can get to, but this is where they are, if you will. Let me just show you. So the pink triangles are going to be the FCC permitted towers, and then the yellow triangles are going to be the county permitted. So in some cases, you'll see where, there'll be 20 some that have both, for example, right? So this one is permitted both by us and by the FCC. So this is an interactive map that we created just because I thought it would be helpful visual for the board. And at some point in the future, this may be relevant. We did talk to Jake Pitty, the county assessor, about how would we know, or would we know if a tower went unused? According to, well, I skipped over number 1. Sorry. First of all, it'd be notification of the landowner. So a landowner could call and say, our tower's not in use anymore. And maybe they would know that because there's a lease payment change, or maybe they just realize it's not in effect. I did talk with Jake Pitty, the assessor, and he said the county rarely does find out if a tower has ceased operation. As he indicated here, they can come back into use in the future. So the tower is the support structure. The antenna is, in a cell phone situation, is what obviously gets your phone to work. So those are two different things. So the tower can remain in place and still has value. The antenna they may change out depending on who's on that tower for service. I think where this really came from, and the board was really wondering, is there a decommissioning requirement for towers that are not in use? So the FCC does not have a requirement. They have a requirement that if they don't have a requirement that the tower be dismantled. They have a requirement that if it is dismantled, that they're told it is. As far as the county goes, we do have in our ordinance under telecommunication towers that any obsolete or unused antenna must be removed within 12 months of cessation of use. So again, it's both. It's antennas and towers. So that's the tricky part because your antenna support structure is your tower. Wind turbines, again, we have a little bit more detail in the wind turbine section of our ordinance because we dealt with that later. We do require decommissioning, a decommissioning plan, and then we do can require financial assurance for our wind turbines. And that's all listed here. Can the county or do we require financial assistance? Again, for the Planning Commission, if this happens to be a tower that goes to the Planning Commission as a CUP, the Planning Commission and the board can require financial guarantee. You can require that for any land use that goes in front of you. Obviously, you have to have a connection between the requirement and the use. I just also then listed out in 10B what uses specifically allow for a financial guarantee, and there's some listed here. Is the county holding any financial guarantee for a tower? The answer is no, we are not currently. And then options, and some of this may be even options that maybe you weren't even looking for options, but we did summarize some for you either way. So options, if you're concerned about decommissioning of towers and financial guarantees, we have that ability already. But if you wanted to be more clear, you could amend the ordinance as suggested in number 2 to specifically incorporate language into the ordinance requiring decommissioning and financial assurance. It's a little bit redundant, but you could do that if that made you feel better. A couple county, Dr. Williams helped reach out to, I think it was Micah way back when, and got some information from the city of Ramsey and Sherburne County on what some others do related to that. So I listed those here. Neither of them have utilized the provision to date. So neither option has been utilized or required to be removed. And then thirdly, was do we want to pursue removal of towers despite the lack of permit condition, and or financial assurity? And what was eliminated from your packet is the county attorney's opinion on this. And obviously Chad May is not here. So I will take a breath, Madam Chair, and unless you want me to paraphrase in a couple of minutes what Chad is saying.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So Chad was given this outline, and Shelley and I met with him and also with Dr. Williams. So again, it was presented whether or not we should have a role, or if we wanted to have a role, what would that role look like? He reiterated a lot of what is already required in our ordinance. There is also the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act, and you're wondering why does it have anything to do with us or towers? But it does, and that was from 2012. There's certain federal guidelines related to antennas and telecommunication towers where we have to be very mindful of what we do in situations related to telecommunication towers. County Attorney's Office also wanted to identify that obviously every communication tower does involve a private lease agreement, and the terms of those lease would always be the primary mechanism, not the county. And that's typical of no matter what sort of business operation is going on. The remaining question, he indicates, involves whether or not the county could require decommissioning of communication towers that are not within the county's jurisdiction. And basically what he is saying is that if we had to, he would consider it. But it would be a very limited situation, and it would have to, as always comes back to zoning, is public health, safety, and welfare. So if Stearns County has a public health, safety, and welfare reason to let's say remove a tower, then we would have to start working with the attorney's office on all the facts related to that.
Ms. Berg? So would that mean that if we just wanted as a matter of policy, if they weren't in use, that they be removed? That would not be enough. There'd have to be, somehow it was a safety issue or?
Madam Chair, yes, that's really what I'm getting from Chad, and I'm sure he would be willing to visit with the board and in the future.
Okay. So members, this is on as an information and discussion item. Do people have thoughts, questions? There are a few suggested options if we want to pursue that. Wait, Commissioner Bertram.
Madam Chair, I'm the one that brought it up and asked for it to be looked into, primarily because of this reason. So I find out that, of course, towers are more needed in the rural areas because, in a city, you'll have a number of buildings that these towers, antennas, and everything are mounted on. So I came across the one on the border of Paynesville Township, Zion, huge, and Mike's working with me on doing the broadband connection there. Those folks are underserved by broadband and also cell communication. It's an issue for the fire department. It's an issue for the people that are living there with cell phones and everything else. And I remember permitting that one when I was on the Planning Commission. And so I got a hold of the tower, and then I found out there's no location of an antenna or anything. Well, I got a hold of the tower company that built it and said, why do you have a tower there that you're not utilizing? And he said, well, we just kind of build them, and then we hope that someone comes to us and does that. And I said, well, that's interesting, because when we did the wind farms that I referenced earlier, 5 of them, they all were going to construct these, are those the wet ones that the wind generation? And then we required them that after they serve their purpose, they take them down. Solar panels, if they're not generating power within 12 months, they need to be removed. Wind turbines, if they're not generating power after 12 months, they need to be removed. So I thought, well, that's interesting. And the real reason for the question is, it would be a way for, I think the reason they're not making connections with cell, so the people need better cell coverage. So the way to make the tower companies that are building these, motivate them to come up with leases and agree. If they were more reasonable with a cell communication company, then there would be locations, but they're being unreasonable. They got the tower and they think we can wait until, okay, well, that game isn't benefiting that area. You built the tower to service an area, service the area, allow carriers to locate, and if you're more reasonable with your leases and everything, well, I'll guarantee you that if we told them we might remove the tower, they'd get more reasonable, and then they'd locate cell carriers, which really should be the reason. Why would we allow someone building a wind, the WEC or whatever you call it, tower, if there's not going to be a wind tower farm or something? I mean, why would we allow that? Because we do make them take it down even if there is a wind farm once it's done its job. So that's the whole point of it. And then, of course, I thought, well, if that one's that way, I mean, I must have been a part of approving 20 towers in the years that I was on the Planning Commission. How many other ones are out there, and why are we just allowing them to be built and potentially not fully used? We do require that they have to co-locate up to 4 antennas. So that's smart. Rather than having 4 companies build 4 towers, somebody a lot smarter than me figured that out a long time ago. If they get a tower, let's make sure that they have to allow 4 carriers to access the tower. So that's smart. But now here we got a tower that nobody's accessing. And what's the benefit of that? And so my real point is, let's motivate that cell company, the tower company that built it, to utilize it, to allow it to be utilized to serve the rural community, including the fire department and the other communication out there. So that's why.
Thanks.
How we do that, I don't know. I read, part of what I read, Madam Chair, is that we could remove them after 12 months. And then now what you just said, what Chad May says, we can't remove them after 12 months.
Ms. Berg and then Commissioner Notch.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bertram, so the one that's in question, the permit was issued by the township, so I think they would have to have a role in whether or not they would want to enforce that provision if we honor the MOU that way. What Chad May from the Attorney's Office is saying is that the tower itself still has a value to it. So it's the cessation of use of what? The tower, which equals the ability to put an antenna on, or is it cessation of use transmitting cell coverage? Then that would be removal of the antenna. So that's, I think, where it gets complicated really fast, and we would have to work with him on how to untangle that web.
On his, if you don't mind holding just for a second, Commissioner Notch, I was thinking it sounds like part of the real question is this potentially a way to increase real cell coverage or the other coverage, or what, if not, what are our tools available? Because I could see how you're getting there. And for what it's worth, in St. Cloud, I had 2 towers within a half mile from me. So it's definitely not just the rural areas. And one of the companies was trying to charge us texting roaming fees from our house, and it was a half a mile away. It's like, you got to be kidding me. So we want appropriate kinds of uses. So that might be the other question. And I know Mike isn't here with us today, but that is something I think we're interested in. How are we having good, cost-effective broadband? How are we having good, cost-effective cell coverage, et cetera? Commissioner Notch.
Well, I was just going to maybe comment too. You know, I don't know how many towers are built without a function, because obviously the company is spending a lot of money to build a tower if you don't have somebody that's going to commit to it. And the other thing is, I don't know how many of these are sitting idle, but could it be that somebody built it with the intent of a contract, and then somebody reneged on the contract and they had the tower up, and now you have the tower, but you don't have anybody that's going to use it? I would think putting a tower up is fairly expensive, so I don't know if anybody would just plop them up all over. The other thing too, with these towers, I remember the Verizon one by just west of El Rosa. That was a few years ago, I think, that came here when they put that tower up. It's I guess my comment is, I think if we're going to do an ordinance change, yeah, it's probably good to have a decommissioning fee in there or some decommissioning plan, but it sounds like it's pretty restrictive. Then the bigger elephant that I wouldn't want to get into is when farmers quit livestock farming, they have manure structures. Technically, they're supposed to close those manure structures. You know, we have how many of those out there that are sitting there as rural swimming pools, basically, for ducks and geese. You know, so again, you know, I appreciate the information, because I guess I didn't. Of the 76, is the 39 wind towers part of that 76, or is that's separate? Okay, thanks.
And I was thinking, as we were looking at it, it also reinforces the fact that we do not have a TV tower here. It still drives me crazy. You know, we have to use something off of the Twin Cities or up in Brainerd, and we are a rather large area to not have our own TV tower. So it's interesting with that. So it sounds like, and I really appreciate this information too, and I think I personally need a little time to kind of process the information, and particularly what you brought up trying to get to, because those are, you know, maybe we don't have a quote unquote board policy on trying to make sure we've got cell phone coverage all over, but it is something that goes with the communications pieces that we've been working on. Do we have other tools to try to get there? And what, if anything, with this? Yes, having some kind of requirement of a fee up front might make sense, and yet with the limitations, I guess I'd want to hear more about Chad. We don't want to enact something that doesn't do anything. Commissioner Lensmeyer and then Commissioner Bertram.
So should we concern ourselves with every underutilized or improvement or an improvement that's not being used across the county. I don't know why we would be concerned with a tower that's not being utilized. If I had to defend it, I'd say, well, it doesn't pollute. The punchline is there are, for the construction of a tower, yeah, we have some say in that, but it's primarily between the company and the property owner. But I don't know that an unused tower does harm. Does it pollute? Does it, maybe it'll come in handy and, for some future use. At some point, I appreciate our diligence, but are we getting to the point sometimes where we're looking for problems to solve that really aren't problems?
Commissioner Bertram.
Madam Chair, the cell company, I asked him point blank, did you have carriers committed to this, or why'd you build them? He said, no, we had no carriers permitted or interested, but it was kind of the build it and they'll come concept. And he said, we had money, the company that builds them said, let's identify areas where it meets. I don't know how they figure that out with the transmission and everything. And so they built them, and I personally think they're being unreasonable with what they're asking for the leases. But again, and then to answer Commissioner Lenzmeyer, the problem is that we've got an underserved area with fire. I guess Stearns County Sheriff's didn't have a problem with it because I checked with them because of their other communication. But fire rescue and then the immediate neighborhood don't have good connection, and there's a tower and you're not using it. So that's the whole point. So I think we found out more than what we thought we knew. I'd like to have that map and any information that we didn't get. And then what we also don't know is how many others, as Angie said, aren't being used, and again, all that stuff. So if nothing else, I haven't seen the tower on the Planning Commission agenda for years. So maybe we've saturized it. Maybe we're beyond that now, but let's fully utilize them for the good of the whole, in my opinion.
And it sounds like technology also might have changed, and, given what else we all have been working on, including middle mile on broadband, among other things, what are the other opportunities here? And I think one of my takeaways is, what are the levers to try to make sure there's decent coverage at an affordable price so that people can actually get cell phone coverage? And I think there may be some other tools out there for us to consider with that. Commissioner Persky, did you have anything?
I just want to add, I guess I have no problem with the tower remaining as long as there's no safety concerns. I think also just allow the free market to allow it to sit there as well. If they're going to let that tower sit there not being used, they have to make a decision if they want to drop their prices. What I would be concerned about is if they've established a monopoly by having that tower there, which would prohibit other people from coming in and building something more economical. Then they're leveraging that tower in a way that's to their advantage. Otherwise, let the free market go, and if it's not a problem, let it stay, and maybe the use will be there in a few years.
Are we getting to the point where we're inventing problems?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, and again, for me, Commissioner Bertram, what I'm hearing you talking about is this a lever to get, do we have anything do we have any tools that could help us? And the answer on this particular one, maybe on terms of decommissioning or permit, that might be not so much, but I'm pretty intrigued with what else can we do. So I think with others, I don't see any problem in it staying there. I do share your concern about what's happening though. So maybe there's something else creatively we can come up with, or some other levers to be helping with them. I like you, want to see what Chad May put together.
And clearly, Madam Chair, we're not inventing the problem when you can't, fire rescue has lapsed communication. I guess depending on if it's you living there, I don't think that's making up an issue. And two, if you're working at home and you can't use your cell phone, That's not making up an issue.
Right.
So fortunately, the people that live in that area don't live in metro areas where that probably isn't an issue. But out there, it is an issue, and that's why we're doing the broadband thing.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think it's a concern for us to kind of wrestle with. Thank you for that presentation, this information. Look forward to getting the electronic version of that to look at it more closely. Remember, since the only item we have left is issues by commissioners, so instead of having a break right now, are you okay with us just doing the issues by commissioner? Okay, all right. Commissioner Lensmeyer, anything?
No, I think we've found some opportunities here to solve problems that either don't exist or happen before they become a problem. We're a creative lot. I gotta hand it to us.
Okay, Commissioner Bertram.
Madam Chair, really nothing. Thanks for all the staff work and everything. And just for FYI, I'll be Zooming the first meeting in February and March.
Commissioner Notch.
I just was going to just briefly mention, I did attend the first Minnesota Rural Counties meeting in Douglas County and Alexandria 2 weeks ago, or I guess it'll be last week, Monday. It'll be interesting, you know, where this group goes. They did pick up, there's 42 counties total now that are members. They just picked up 7 more in 2024 and 2 in 2023. It's interesting because they do deal with some of the issues we deal with on watersheds. A lot of drainage conversations with the drainage work group out of the state of Minnesota and some of those issues. So it'll be interesting to see, if we fit going forward, with all their discussions. And then I won't be at this municipal league meeting. I have soccer watershed meeting tonight. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Persky.
I don't have much, just that I want to say City of St. Cloud and those involved did a nice job with the observance of Martin Luther King Day at the River's Edge celebration they had. It was nice to see Sheriff's Department and St. Cloud law enforcement there. It was very well attended. Also, municipal league tonight, so for those folks that don't know, our day starts with a meeting and our day ends with a meeting. So, yeah, hope to see you all out there tonight.
We used to be interesting folks, honest.
Well, and at least a couple of us started with the meeting before this meeting.
Yeah.
So, yes, I was going to bring up the Municipal League. There's a lot of good information to be sharing there. I think the other thing, just to remind everybody, not that we're Minnesotans, we shouldn't need reminding, but make sure you're getting those layers out. I know this morning I had to go looking for layers because it's colder than it had been. We finally got Minnesota winter. So people, please be safe. And thank you to our Public Works and Highway Department. They're doing a lot of work this time of year, and it's just staying cold out there. Same with the Sheriff's Department. For the members of the public, after we adjourn, the board members are going to be meeting with the architects regarding the Jail Justice Center study in the boardroom. And with that, our meeting is adjourned.